Hey, all you folks, and welcome to Kelly's Chronicles, where I sit down with people who are living everyday lives and listen to their extraordinary stories hidden behind normal, quiet existences. Because here we believe that those lives need to be heard, acknowledged, and celebrated as to not be forgotten by the passage of time. Hope all of you had a wonderful week. It was a good week over here. It's been a little bit warm. We're starting to get the humidity to kick in down here in the south. It has not quite kicked in yet, but boy, I tell you what, yesterday was a hot one. It is, you could cut the air with a knife. Let me tell you, that's what they say down here. It's so thick, you cut it with a knife. So, and then we're working on where this week we'll be getting our liquor license, and then we'll be opening up the next week after that. So I'm taking a little bit of a break this week away from the bar because I don't want to get burned out. Doing some cleaning, the usual stuff that you do. But that's what's going on over here down in good old Alabama. How was your week, Dad? How'd it go for you?
Yeah, we went to Los Angeles to see your two sisters, and because Amy's pregnant, so we wanted to go down and
Mhm.
check up on her and see how what she needed, if anything, and see their new house. And as far as stuff around here, I'll spend a lot of time in Pokey. We just finished like a week of study, getting ready for our amateur radio licensing, the ham radio licensing. And we had that test on Saturday. We had our final exam, and me and your mom both passed. So we're looking for our call signs. Will be coming from the FCC pretty soon, and then we'll be able to broadcast. And
Very
yeah,
nice.
it's just a hobby. You can use
Yeah,
it for emergency purposes and
yes, you
hurricanes
can.
or earthquakes or something, but normally in a day-to-day routine, it's just a hobby. It's a lot of fun. You can basically talk to anybody in the world, just
Right.
like Japan. Japan has 3 million hams, so
I didn't
we
know
can
that.
probably get on with the Japanese. And I've been to Japan, so I could do a lot of communication with the Japanese, and a lot of them speak good English, so that won't
Yeah.
be a problem. And I can talk to maybe somebody in Sweden or Germany and see if I can get convince them to do a little genealogy for me.
That's what I'm
And
talking
yeah,
about.
it's really a good it's a good hobby, and it has a lot of ways to you know communicate and have friends all over the world.
Definitely. Okay.
And
Well, that's awesome.
they also broadcast to the International Space Station, and the hams have their own satellites. They have satellites in orbit that they can communicate. They can bounce their signals off the satellite if they don't have a good propagation, wave propagation. They can bounce it off the satellite, and
Okay.
our, yeah, it's kind of cool. It's really
You guys are ham radio operators now.
right.
And like you said, it is a hobby, but it's also really good to have in an emergency situation. Just
Yep,
I know a lot of survivalists will have a ham radio,
yep.
and you guys are kind of survivalists. So I would say
We're still
amateur.
here. We're surviving.
You're surviving. That's right.
Yeah,
But you guys know how to garden, raise animals, preparedness. Like you're
yep.
very all about preparedness.
Well, we did get our meat chickens. Got
Oh, you
25
did?
meat chickens. Yeah, they're little tiny chicks now, and
Mhm.
they're out in
Good
the
to
out. They
see.
got the big chickens are in the chicken tractor, and they come out and run around the yard at night. But the little ones are in where they were living before in the chicken house, and they'll be growing up, and we'll about 7 or 8 weeks from now they'll be in the freezer.
Yeah.
So it's kind of grim, but
Well,
That's life. That's
that's
life.
life. But I mean, you guys raise them humanely, and they are well cared for, and they're
Yeah.
safely raised, and then you use them for meat. So
And yeah. So anyway, and our goats, we'll keep one of the goats, and the other two will go to auction.
keep them flopsy, right?
Even floppy, yeah. And the other two, the other two with no ears, they're going to auction.
Yeah, you
I
know,
don't know.
weird losers.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You don't have any ears, you don't survive around here. Gotta have ears.
I think I had a little bit of a pull in that one. I was sitting here like, "You're gonna
Yeah,
keep Flopsy, right? You're keeping Flopsy, right?" I think mom's like, "We better keep Flopsy or Kelly's gonna be all sad.
yeah.
I gotta come
They're all
visit my
so
goat."
they're so cute. It's I don't know how the Hispanics. That's
I eat a lot of goats.
they love goat meat. So I can still remember that one. I went to Quinceanera back in Arkansas, and that's their
Quinceañera?
fifth girl's 15th birthday,
Uh-huh.
and so we went to this quinceanera, and there was a pot sitting on the floor in the kitchen, and we had a big, pretty good sized pot. And I said, "Hey, what's in the pot?" And they said, "Well, open the lid, and check it out."
Oh, no.
So I opened the lid, and in this there was a goat, a a baby goat with his head still on, but no skin. And they had put, I don't know how much chili powder on this poor goat, and it was bright red. And I said, "Whoa!"
Ugh, I'm not a fan
And
of goat meat. I've had goat meat, and it's very greasy. It's
yeah, it's
very
gamey too, isn't it?
gamey.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because goats' diet is about anything that's laying around, they'll eat it.
Yeah. I'd rather do lamb or yeah, I'd rather do lamb
Yeah,
chops.
but then if you look at a goat and a lamb, those lambs are so oh, they're beautiful. That's the on cuteness pills or something.
Oh,
'Cause
yeah, yeah, no,
they're
I
all
get it, yeah.
fuzzy and they're just like a goat. They bounce around, and they're very
Oh, yeah,
active, but,
very
they're a lot cuter.
sheep are supposed to be honestly, sheep are for wool, that
But
for I mean, more than anything, and I personally don't like eating small baby animals, so I don't eat veal. I just think that it's just really why do you have to eat them as babies? Like, why do you gotta do that? Wait till they're grown
yeah,
up, like like,
yeah.
what
Let them have a
let
life
them live their
instead
lives.
of, ending their life and they're still little children.
Yeah,
It's like, going into an orphanage and I don't know. Yeah,
it's bad. So
whatever.
I've
It's
never been like, I've had lamb chops, but I would rather just eat a steak over
yeah,
lamb. I've never had veal, ever, because I don't agree with the way that the babies are raised. They take them away from their mothers very young, and they raise them in tiny little dog pens, and I've seen the way that the process is, and I am not a fan. The cows need to go out into the pasture and enjoy their lives for the remainder of the time that they have, and then they can go in for butcher, but I do not support
yeah.
that.
Yeah, well,
And, like, even, like,
dairies are the
sheep
worst.
are
Yeah.
Huh?
I said dairies are the worst for,
Yeah.
veal because they have these, like, little dog kennels that they put them in, and they feed them milk.
Yeah, they are.
They don't graze ever. They
Yeah,
raise them on milk, and I think it's about 6 to 8 weeks, they go to slaughter, and,
that's just
the meat is real white because it's not like beef is red meat, not
yeah,
veal, it's white meat.
it's gonna have
But dairy, that's their thing. They keep the cows and they, slaughter the bulls. The bulls, they have no purpose other than to breed with, they're like a drone. They breed with the
yeah,
cows, and then that's
okay.
the end of them. It's, uh, it's kind of a cruel practice, but, I love milk, and I got dairy farmers in my family, and,
Mhm.
that's just, way of life for thousands and thousands of dairy farmers. And
Yep,
if
it
we didn't
is.
if we
You
didn't eat the
can't.
cheese and drink the milk, then
Yeah,
they couldn't make a living. So
exactly. So they have to.
yeah. So
That's how it
that's
goes.
a personal thing. I mean, if you don't want to drink
Oh
milk,
yeah.
that's fine. Mm,
But I
what?
still eat cheese, and I still eat, like, cottage cheese, and I still eat certain cheese products that come from
Right.
milk, so I can't really
Yeah.
say anything, so
Yeah.
I have to just
You could have goats.
I could have
We
goat
milk our goats.
too. I know you
Yeah, and
do.
like your mom just came in from feeding the babies. She has to bottle feed 2 of them,
Yep.
and, they're about ready to be weaned, they're right at the weaning age, and,
Yeah.
uh
Oh, it's gonna be noisy.
yeah.
Goats don't, the goats aren't very good mothers, but you try to take away what's theirs, they get real ticked off.
Yeah.
They're like, "It's not really
Yeah,
like
it's
I cared about them anyway, but I want my baby back."
yeah, goats are not the best mothers. Sheep are much better, and I think that's one reason why in, religion, it's always the lambs that they talk about.
Yeah,
They don't talk about the goats of God or anything. It's always the lamb of God,
yeah.
not because
Well, the
goats
goat
are
is also a symbol
they're
for the
they're not
devil.
they're not the best mothers, and they abandon their children on a regular basis, and
Yeah,
you know,
they do.
but sheep are very good mothers,
Yep.
and they take really good care of their little lambs.
But anyway, we, talked a lot last week about the different, animals and creepy crawlies of, Vietnam, and so this week, um, we'll go ahead and take on where we left off. You take it away, Dad.
Okay, we were talking earlier that I might address the way that the military dealt with the Vietnamese, and just a precautionary statement is that every war the enemy is treated on is like they're always dehumanized,
Mhm.
and they're not they're the military either intentionally or unintentionally they dehumanize the enemy, and that happened in Vietnam. And Vietnam was unique in a way because in a lot of wars you don't have direct contact with civilians, the non-combatants. Uh, you're dealing with soldiers and sailors that are in the Navy or the Army or the Air Force, and you don't like a soldier in say World War I. He was fighting the Germans, but he was in France, and so the civilians he dealt with were French, and they were our allies. The German civilians were hundreds of miles sometimes from the front lines, and you very
Mm.
soldier in World War I had very little contact with a German civilian. Same in World War II. There was some theaters where they were directly involved. Italy is a good example. The Italians were allied with the Nazis for a
Yep.
part of the war anyway, and the Americans came into Italy and they were dealing on a daily basis with civilians, non-combatants, and there was some really bad things that happened, but usually very good things. Americans, universally, the American soldier and sailor and airman, whichever military, they're accommodating toward the civilians. They go out of their way to avoid killing civilians or wounding civilians. They don't. They don't. They try not to get to kill the civilians that are involved. And the other side, that's not the way they are. Americans are very unique, as a matter of fact, in their relationships with non-combatants. They historically, through all the wars that we've ever been involved with, we went out of our way, and sometimes to our detriment, uh, tactically, to avoid killing civilians or wounding. But the other side, they are, and I'm just generally speaking now, the
Yeah.
Japanese in World War II and the Germans in World War II were absolute animals when it came to non-combatants. They would kill unarmed civilian just as soon as they would kill a soldier, and we were just the opposite. We would try to our best to avoid that. And in Korea, same thing in Korea. We were fighting in cities and towns and villages in Korea, lots of civilians, and we didn't tried our best to avoid civilian involvement. And the other side, the Chinese and North Koreans, friggin' animals. They
Mhm.
I don't even want to go into detail, but I will assure you, being a military person and knowing the history of warfare, there was no mercy shown by the other side. And the same in Vietnam. Vietnam was not unique in that regard. We went out of our way normally to avoid civilian casualties. We spent lots of time and lots of money and lots of resources to protect the civilians, the non-combatants in Vietnam. However, there were exceptions, and I witnessed some exceptions. And as a matter of fact, I partook in some of the things that, looking back, were just stupid. And we used to call it sweeping the roads. And we take a broom and a Jeep and we go down the road. And if it was some Vietnamese on a bicycle, we'd stick the broom out, knock him off the bicycle. Didn't kill him, just
Yeah.
pissed him off,
Just
And,
being a jerk.
uh, so that was just a small thing that we did. I participated in sweeping the roads, and you just knock them off the bicycle and get up and they'd be cussing at us and, you stupid American. So anyway, the there were times when they would do, the Marines especially, that I was involved with. Wasn't very involved with the Army over there, and the Marines would they would go on these search and destroy missions, and they would go into these villages and they would search the village. And what they were looking for was weapons, okay, of any kind. I'm talking about
Okay.
rifle, pistol, grenade launch, anything that could be used to hurt or kill Americans. And they'd look for these weapons. Well, it was kind of a weird deal because the Vietnamese government had a very strict gun control law where if you were a civilian, you weren't supposed to have guns. But then the Viet Cong, who were also civilians, they had guns, and they would use those
Okay.
guns to kill or control the civilian population. And I always said, well, what if everybody had guns? What if they said, don't worry about it, everybody can have a gun? Then I think they would have been able to, if the local villagers would have been able to control the Viet Cong, because they would have been armed too. And it wouldn't have been like just one side having the guns. So the military realized that early on in the war. They said, "Hey, the Vietnamese government doesn't allow these people. But what if we set up some militias? What if we just said, okay, Mister Vietnamese guy, you're now part of a militia, and
Okay.
we'll give you a gun, and then you'll be in the militia, and you can defend your village." It didn't work because what happened was we give these nice firearms to these civilian militias, and the Viet Cong come in and seize the weapons because they wanted them too. They wanted these nice American-made guns, and so they started what they called fortified villages. And what they would do is the military would go in, they would set up usually on top of a hill. They would go in and they would clear off the top of this hill, and they move all the villagers up on this hill, and they had bunkers around the top of the hill, and they had some of them had watchtowers, lots of barbed wire, concertina wire around the
Mm,
perimeter, and to try to slow down any aggressors that are coming up there to hurt you. And
yeah.
that worked out pretty good. I got involved in one, a place called Duke Duke, which is a special forces camp. It was in our usual area of operation, but it was way over on the almost in Laos. And I got over there with special forces, and we got attacked by a battalion-sized North Vietnamese army unit, and they overran us. This old fortified village had men, women, and children, and they went through and they're killing kids and women. And, I mean, they were not good people, and they had no regard for human life whatsoever. And I had to bring in one.
Is it something that you had to watch? Was that something that you witnessed?
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah. I was deployed out there to work with. It's going to first in 7 psyops, Army psychological warfare units, and
yeah.
so they had deployed several beach jumpers out in the field to special forces camps, and the special forces were they would use first and 7 psyops quite regularly, trying to do psychological warfare on the VC. It was basically a slaughter, and they brought in a bunch of the helos came in with some regular army guys. Uh, with these fortified villages, they don't have like 4 or 5 special forces guys, Green Berets in there, and then they would train and utilize the militias that were guarding the fortified village. Anyway, when they got overran like that, they would just bring in a regular army. The Hueys would fly in, and they would dump out a company. They came in and took care of the VC, the VNVA. They were harassing these fortified villages. Yeah. So anyway, there was one incident where they had these special forces had these they call med caps, medical civil action patrols, and they would they would go into a village. They would go into any village, but they would especially go into fortified villages and places where they could operate for a full day without being harassed. So they went in this one area, and in Vietnam, they had lots of diseases over there, lots of tropical diseases and regular diseases of children, like chicken pox and measles
Mm,
and polio and everything. And they went in and they inoculated this one village of uh, for I think they gave them what they call an MMR shot, which is measles, mumps, and rubella, and to try to stop the kids from having these childhood diseases. And they would do this in America. That was the MMR shot. That was part of being a kid in America, getting your measles, mumps, and rubella. Anyway, they inoculated all these kids. It was probably about 25 or 30 kids in this one village. And the VC came in that night and they cut off all the kids' arms and stacked them in the middle of the village. And they said, this is what happens if you cooperate with the Americans at any level. We'll kill your kids. I think most of the kids died from blood loss and infections and everything. It was horrible. Friggin' VC. Anyway, uh,
So when that happened in that village, would you go in there to try to basically refortify and
no,
kill off the
no,
VC, or was that something that you would just
no.
walk into, or
It's just see, village the Vietnam was laced with rivers. There were rivers everywhere in Vietnam, and the villagers, they were mostly rice farmers. They didn't grow corn or wheat or anything. They grew rice, and so they had rice has to have water, and so they would
right,
locate their village on the river, and they would divert some of the water from the river into their rice fields, and that's how they cultivated their rice. And so there was villages, hundreds and hundreds of villages that were on these rivers, and the Viet Cong were operating all over Vietnam, basically with a very little uh, harassment or very little action by the military to control their movements, because most of the Viet Cong were rice farmers. They
right,
were, they were farmers during the day and Viet Cong at night. And then there was the North Vietnamese. They were from a completely different part of Southeast Asia. They were up around Hanoi and and they were probably rice farmers up there too. But they had a pretty good sized army, and they would come down and engage our armies, and it was just out of control. In order to really win the war, I guess we would have had to move every village into uh, a fortified area where they could be protected. And we did that in several areas. Da Nang had uh, a pretty good sized village inside the wire in Da Nang where the Marines could protect them. And they had hundreds and hundreds of civilian people in these, and they built some pretty nice housing for them. I got pictures of them, and they're wooden structures with metal roofs, but they're a lot better than what a lot of them had. They had like shacks with thatched roofs and you know bamboo, pretty basic thing. And several of the bigger towns would have regular houses in them, but for the most part, the majority of Vietnamese, uh, in at least where I was at, they were in the villas, and they were being harassed by the VC. And the VC, like I said, were rice farmers, and locals knew who the VC were. They
yeah.
knew which one of the farmers were active in Viet Cong, but
But
it
you
was it,
said that they would be family members or family friends, and
right.
so they didn't ever wanna disclose who that person was 'cause it's
Then they
family.
would be arrested. They would be arrested and put into we areas, I guess you'd call them prisoner camps. We call them re-education camps, and we would take
Oh,
like a Viet Cong or an NVA captured. We go into these re-education camps, and they would be taught the principles of democracy, and they would sort of have their mindset changed to from communism and terrorism to a more peaceful, democratic thing. A lot of them would switch sides and go and work with the American military or the Vietnamese military, and we had call them Kit Carson scouts, and they were ex either NVA or VC, and they would bring them into their old op areas where they had been deployed as the enemy, and they would take them in there. They would show where where the ammo and arms were cached, and where their infiltration routes. And some of them would have trucks back in the jungle. They have trucks stored back in there and hidden out, jeeps, trucks, whatever, back in the jungles. And so they would point out where they were at, and then they would not be able to use them. They would confiscate them, and they wouldn't be used against Americans.
Hmm.
And then we had interpreters that worked with us. Some of them were ex-VC or ex in not so much ex because the North Vietnamese spoke a different dialect of Vietnamese. So
Huh.
they were instantly recognized by the Vietnamese. Oh, you're from the North, you know.
Oh.
And so they tried to use locals that spoke the South Vietnamese dialect and for translators for because a lot of times they were used as prisoner interrogation. And that was one
Yeah.
thing we got. Uh, we had language specialists in our unit and beach jumpers that spoke Vietnamese, and we would use them for interrogating prisoners. And that was one of our jobs. We would work with The Marines had specialists too. They had their own Marines had their own intelligence units that were doing kind of parallel work with what we were doing, and but ours mainly was psychological warfare and
Hmm.
electronic warfare. We would use electronics extensively to monitor the North Vietnamese and Russian uh, radio traffic. And anyway, I saw lots of really terrible things that the Vietnamese would do to their own people and trying to is terrorism. I mean, you go anywhere in the world where they have terrorism, they're terrorizing the civilians. It doesn't work too well with the military because you terrorize a Marine, he'll come and kill you. I mean, but the civilians, terrorize civilians. They don't have weapons, and they have their children right there with them, and you say, "I'm gonna
They're
kill your
scared.
kid." That's
Yeah.
terrorism, and that was the big thing in Vietnam was the Viet Cong terrorists. The North Vietnamese, they didn't really get involved too much in that. They were regular soldiers, and I'm here to tell you, they were good soldiers.
Hmm.
They, uh, they were good fighters, and,
Yeah.
they'd put up a good tussle with you. If you got, hit by North Vietnamese, you know, you were in
Better.
for a fight. And,
Yeah.
Viet Cong were more, they could be, psyched out pretty easy, not with psychological warfare, but drop a little napalm on them or something, and they're ready to surrender. They're they have a strong will, but when that will is put to test, you have to
Mhm.
be a trained soldier
Yeah.
to really be effective. If you're in a firefight or something, you have to know when to keep your head down. The Viet Cong, a lot of times they were pretty easy to take care of. We could overpower them pretty easily,
Yeah.
and yeah,
'Cause they were civilian fighter. They were, like we talked about guerrilla warfare, they didn't really know how to fight, they just had a gun and they would shoot it at you guys.
right.
Some of them probably knew how to
Yeah.
fight. Did you ever get into well, you've said this before, but did you frequently get into hand-to-hand combat with the Viet Cong?
No, no, that was that's if you got into hand to hand combat, you had done something wrong. You had allowed them to come to get through your wire,
Too
through your
close.
perimeter, because the best way, if you're in a war, the best way is never getting hand to hand combat. I'll go back 100, 200 years. when people were using swords. Yeah, there was all hand-to-hand combat pretty much.
Yeah.
They had a little artillery and some rifles and stuff, but basically they would stand in rows and shoot at
Mhm.
each other like 100 feet apart.
Yeah.
And
Like Civil
so,
War.
and after you go, then they would keep advancing and shooting, and pretty soon you were on top of each other. It was hand-to-hand combat. But with modern warfare, where you have lots of artillery, you have aircraft, you have weapons that can reach out and touch you at 500 yards. Uh, Hand-to-hand combat was rare, and
Yeah.
yeah, there were times when it got nasty, and they would come through the wire, especially uh, if you were an isolated unit. The Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army would have more of a tendency to attack isolated units, especially artillery units, because they were usually out. They were out away from the main bases normally, and
Yeah.
they had fields of fire. They would bosses would sit down with a map and they'd draw circles around the area where they had the fire bases, and they would try to have overlapping fields of fire where they could somebody got in
Mhm.
trouble, the artillery could within that field of fire, they could engage the enemy with artillery. So you get out in these fire bases, and they were placed where they were in a protected area. They just wanted to have the fields of fire overlapping, period. And they would put them out on top of mountains and out in the middle of nowhere, so they could have that. They'd have that artillery coverage, and the Viet Cong knew that, and they knew they were isolated, and then they would attack them and try to overrun those positions. And there was some really a lot of guys won medals of honor and stuff because they were engaged in hand-to-hand combat, or they were uh, fighting for hours and hours trying to keep the Viet Cong from coming through their perimeters.
Yeah.
And I have one story that I've recounted. I don't know if I have been in any of these. I don't think I've told you this story. Is
Yeah.
they were had they had this one valley that they wanted to have some artillery in, and so
Okay.
they said, well, the only way you can get artillery into that valley is by flattening the top. These mountains in Vietnam, a lot of them were like ice cream cones. They were straight up, and so there was nowhere to put an artillery unit, and so the Army said, "Well, we want it right here," or the Marines want it right here on top of this mountain. So they brought in the daisy cutters. They had these 25,000-pound bombs, and how they would load them in the back of a C-130, and they would get up over their target, and they'd slide this bomb out, and it had parachutes attached to it. And they'd slide the bomb out the door, and it would go down kind of slow and detonate above the target. And just yeah, they call them daisy cutters because it would flatten everything for in an area probably the size of a football field. We just
Yeah.
completely wreck everything, 100 yards in every direction. And so we were out on patrol, and the sergeant says, "Okay, I want everybody to get behind a tree and put your helmets on. And I want your back to be to that mountain. Don't look at that mountain. Your back needs to be back to that mountain." And oh, okay. So here comes this C-130 flying down the valley, and I was watching. I wasn't a Marine. I didn't care. The sergeant would chew me out, but he couldn't like do anything other than chewing me out.
Yeah.
And so the C-130 came down the valley, and he seen the chutes coming out the back, and you could see it floating down, and all of a sudden, this shock wave came out from the top of this
Whoa.
mountain. You could see like a white ring expanding out. at probably the speed of sound, you know, and then the explosion was this blinding blast, and and all of a sudden, all around where we were sitting, these rocks started falling out of the
Oh my
sky.
gosh, what the heck?
Some of them as big as your head, and this was we were probably a mile away from this detonation, but it blew rocks over where we were at, all over the place, and that's why we were behind a tree. And then when it was all over, and the rock stopped falling, we went and looked over there, and the top of that mountain was gone. It was a flat surface, and they probably blew 100 feet of that mountain off with that 25,000 pound bomb, and that's where the fire base went. So
That's
yeah,
I tell you what,
and
like, I see those pictures where the fire stations are, and I was actually wondering about how did you guys clear so much land off of the top of those mountains? That's how. You just blew the whole top.
yeah, that's one way to do it. And
Mhm.
the other way, if you were in another type of, say, you were down in the jungle and you wanted to have a fire base or a landing zone, there was a lot of LZs where they would try to bring helicopters in so they could deploy troops. So they have LZs and they have fire bases. So how they would bring in these guys and they call them pathfinders, and a lot of them were in Army Rangers or Marine Corps engineers, and they would go into a jungle area, and they had this stuff called primer cord, and what it was it looked like a fuse, but it burned at 20,000 feet per second, and they would take this stuff and wrap it around a tree. And they would put a knot, they'd tie a knot in it, and they would put the knot on the side opposite where they wanted the tree to fall. So if they were, here's the LZ was here, and they wanted the trees to fall away from the LZ, then they would put the knot on the side facing the LZ. And when they would, and they have detonators just like a little, almost looked like a grenade or something. They had a pin. You pull the pin, and then it would send an electrical charge down the primer cord and explode the primer. It would burn. You couldn't see it burn. It would just be instantaneously. But when it got to that knot, it would explode and blow a gigantic chunk out of the tree. And then it would fall. Oh, because you were blowing it out, it would fall away from the LZ. And sometimes it would mess up and it would fall into the LZ, and they'd have to go in there with chainsaws and chainsaw the tree up. But normally, when they then I'm thinking maybe the knot was away from I can't remember but the knot would explode, and the tree would fall whichever way, because they would look at the tree and say it was leaning over this way. Then they would set the knot in a different place. Anyway, that's how they did it with det cord. They didn't use chainsaws, except if the tree fell the wrong way, then they would chainsaw it up. But normally they would just use det cord, and yeah, they would clear an LZ out in nothing flat in a couple of hours. It was nothing. It was just
Gone.
treeless, and yeah, so that was
Man.
done all the time. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Getting back to uh, the way that we treated. Now, you have to remember that, of course, the military always humanizes these. So the Vietnamese were gooks or slant. They call them slants or gooks or lots of other dehumanizing type uh, names. Now, the military as a whole was very human. They were very humane, but there were individual Marines and soldiers were not humane. And I
Mm.
remember this one, I was riding on this truck. We were going just down this road. I don't think we were in convoy. We were just going from, I think we were just carrying food or something. and we were going down this road anyway. And these kids were running out up on the road and trying to sell these. We call them gook boots. And what it was they'd take a tire and it would cut a shoe-shaped uh, piece of rubber out of the tire. And then they'd take inner tube and they would put straps on it. And that's what the Viet Cong and the NVA, that was their shoe, was these gook boots. And this kid was trying to sell them to the Marines. And the Marines, of course, they had boots and stuff. They didn't need these. And so they were this one little boy. I can remember this little boy ran up. He's probably 9, 10 years old. Ran up with these gook boots, and he was trying, you buy, and the Marines were laughing at him, and he got too close, and one Marine kicked him off, just kind of booted him off to the side.
Yeah.
And I said, no, this ain't gonna do it. And so I said, come here. You come here. And you, Marine, don't you touch him. And come over here, and I'll buy. And so I gave him like five five dong, which is like $1.25, because the exchange rate was the official exchange rate about 4 to 1, something like that. So I had some
Yeah.
Vietnamese money, or it might even have been military script, which is they had the military printed their own money over there, and it was
Mm.
from started at a nickel, 5 cent, 10 cent, 25 cent, 50 cents, $1, and then $5, and it was little, like about 4 inches long. It looked like Monopoly money or something. But the
Okay.
military that was wanted you to use, they didn't want you using Vietnamese money or American money. They wanted you to use military script. Well, I gave this kid I had some Vietnamese money because I was working with Vietnamese a lot. So I gave him like $1.25, and I still got him. I still got him. I've kept him for
You
like
still have the
60
boots?
years. I still have him. I still got him. And
Oh,
I bought up this little boy in Da Nang 60 years
yeah.
ago.
Huh.
And I didn't do it as to be any kind of. It would kind of piss me off that these Marines were picking on this little boy, and
Yeah.
I said, I'm gonna buy a pair of these off of him. Not that they were gonna wear them. It's like a souvenir,
Uh-huh.
but
Yeah,
I felt that little boy, that was probably the most money he made all day, and
probably.
I'm sure he's out here trying to make a little money. And then there was I told you about the artillery shells, about the little
Yeah, you told us
boy
about the little boy that picked up the
thing,
artillery shell and burned the
right,
absolute
and
crap
burned,
out of his skin.
fried his skin. Again, just a little boy trying to make a you know a 10 cents or something for his family. He's willing to sacrifice his body to do that. That's war. War
Mhm.
is basically inhumane. You're killing people
Yeah.
for your purpose, whatever your purpose is. See, Vietnam was South Vietnam was democratic, North Vietnamese was communist, and everything that we did was trying to convert or trying to preserve the South Vietnamese democratic government, but they were
Mhm.
very, very corrupt. I mean, South Vietnamese was very corrupt in everything you can think of, the military, the everything, the whole country was corrupt. So really, we were preserving corrupt government. We weren't
Corruption.
preserving democracy. Okay,
Oh.
And guess
Yeah.
what? The North Vietnamese came down and took over South Vietnam in 1975 after we had left. Okay, well, now Vietnam is a still a communist government, but it's a liberal colony. Is they allow businesses, they allow the free exchange of information. The Vietnamese are doing very well.
Yeah.
They're I'm not saying they're not
It's not
extremely
perfect,
wealthy,
but
but everybody's got jobs, plenty of
that's
work.
good.
They are taking over a lot of the manufacturing that China used to do. Because
Yeah,
China, you talk about a mess. There's a mess of a country right there, just
it's a
going
mess.
down. There, the Chinese are they're in serious trouble financially and every other way. Like they're not even reproducing.
Yeah,
There's not enough babies being
really
born,
bad.
so the population is falling.
Have a growth lapse.
Their money is practically worthless. Their real estate, everything is just gone down the pot, and we have they have one man. I call him Emperor Z, as
Mhm.
runs the whole country. Everybody you mess with him and you're dead. And so Vietnam is they're kind of like what China was
Back
30
in the
years
day.
ago.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're going to make the same mistakes that China made.
Yeah,
And even though we didn't lose the war, we lost the will of the people. The people did not want to be under the corrupt South Vietnamese government, so they basically laid down their guns and
they
surrendered.
chose.
I mean, they did
Interesting.
they didn't fight very hard. When the North Vietnamese came across, they basically ran and
Mm, yeah,
surrendered.
they
And
really did.
and we weren't involved by then. We'd been out for a couple of years,
Yeah,
but
the
we could have easily
exit.
defeated the North Vietnamese if we would have had the will to do it. But our government they didn't want anything to do with Vietnam, and so they allowed it to happen. And I don't feel bad about it. I did at the time. I remember in 1975, I was in the Coast Guard, and when Vietnam fell,
Struggle with
I was
that
a
one.
sad. I was a sad dude. I was emotionally crushed, and
Yeah.
it took me a while to get and just say,
Gather
"Well,
yourself again.
right."
Yeah.
And I lost friends over there, and
How much loss?
58,000 58,000 Americans died over there, and hundreds of thousands were wounded, some severely, legs blown
Mhm.
off and stuff. But I don't think that even the ones who were severely wounded now now they did in 75. Every one of them was pissed. I mean, I talked to
Yeah.
Vietnamese, to Vietnam veterans, and they were not happy. 75,
Mm,
nope. They want they were unhappy. But now after decades of going over this in their minds, I think that myself and almost every Vietnam veteran has accepted that that's what they wanted. The Vietnamese people wanted, they were
yeah,
tired of fighting. They'd been fighting for 700 years. They were occupied by the Chinese. Then
yeah.
they got them out, and then the French came in, took over the whole French
Tired,
Indochina. And for 150
tired.
years, they were the friggin' French. And so
Yeah.
they fought the French before World War II. Then during World War II, they fought the Japanese. And the French said, if you fight the Japanese for us, for the French, we'll give you your freedom. After the war was over and Japan was defeated, the French came back in and took over again. And so the Vietnamese fought the French for until 1954, and then they had a battle up in North Vietnam, Dien Bien Phu, and they wiped out the French legionnaires that were in there, and
Wow.
wiped out, took prisoners, and it was a bad scene. and then the Americans came in. So these Vietnamese been fighting
They were
almost
tired.
continuously for like 50 years. They were sick and tired of it, and I just wanted to raise their rice, raise their kids, and
Yeah.
they didn't care
Have
who
some
was in
peace.
charge. Just leave
Ah,
me alone.
yeah.
And so so that's how it played out. And I think now Vietnam veterans we're all reconciled. All the ones I ever talked to, they're just saying, yeah, that's what they want, and they're doing a good job now. They're under communism and all that, but the Vietnamese people, they will ride their motorcycles. They, you know, go to work, and they're okay. They're good people. You remember
Yeah.
that I had a neighbor there in uh, Bentonville.
Arkansas. Yeah, in
Yeah,
Bentonville.
yeah,
And he
yeah.
had been in the war, hadn't he? On
Yeah,
the other side?
he was in the Navy. He's in the Vietnamese
Yeah.
Navy, and he escaped during the takeover in '75. He got out of the country with his family, and I think he went to Thailand for a while in a refugee camp, and then finally worked his way to America. And yeah, he was a good guy, and
Yeah, he was
he was exactly like me. He was reconciled to it. He said, "Still got family over there." He said, "They're doing fine." He said, "Everything's." He said, "They don't have elections or anything to choose who's in charge, but they're they're doing well." And I respect them for being able to get their lives together. And it's been 50 years even since then. And
yeah.
and then you go back to when I was over there, it's like 60 years, 65 back. So come on,
Yeah.
you
I mean,
know,
they
it's over. What a government's over there is they're doing a pretty darn good job, and they're doing a lot better than the Chinese, and they're not
yeah.
threatening anybody. The Chinese are threatening the Vietnamese like they've always threatened them. They've always
Mhm.
been the aggressors, and they're still the aggressor. And the Vietnamese don't put up with that crap. They came over
Yeah.
and it was I think 77. The Chinese attacked in North Vietnam. They attacked the Vietnamese, and the Vietnamese wiped them out.
Wow.
They kicked their butts, and I'm grateful for that. The Vietnamese said, "No, China, you had us for 700 freaking years, and you ain't doing it again. So come on." They'd been, they had their armies was all had just gotten done with America and
Yeah.
Vietnamese army, the whole thing with the war. It was, they were trained, hardened combat veterans, and they
Yeah.
kicked those Chinese. They kicked their butt, and they could do it again. I guarantee you, they could do it again. If the
Absolutely.
Chinese were stupid enough to attack the Vietnamese,
They'd
they
be
would wipe
ready.
them off the planet. The Chinese army is a paper tiger. It's nothing. They would
Yeah.
wipe them so quickly they wouldn't even know they were in a war. And so the Chinese they're kind of tiptoeing around Vietnam. They don't want to mess
Yeah.
with them, and
Don't mess
they'll mess with the
don't mess
Filipinos,
with no.
Taiwanese, Japanese or whatever, but they tiptoe around those Vietnamese because they are those people are warriors,
Fighters.
and it's been 50 years since they were in the last big war, but I'll guarantee you that they would fight to the death to keep
Yeah.
China out. They hate Chinese.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had little enclaves of them down in Saigon. They had little Chinatowns down there. The Vietnamese that had they kept them under. They said, "You stay in there. Don't come out of that. That's your area. You can do what you want in there, but don't come out of there, or we'll take you out." And
That's
because
good.
they didn't like the Chinese were there, they didn't like them.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely understand that, but Well,
Uh,
we're out of time.
Good
So,
time. We got it. Yeah, it's been an hour. So,
yep. So let's go ahead
yeah.
and wrap it up. Some awesome stories, even though some of them can be a little bit gruesome, but that's war. And that's what we're
Yeah.
here to learn about. We're here about education and healing and learning some of the things that sometimes are not talked about. So, but we want to thank everybody for joining us today. Please like, comment if you can, subscribe, share with your family and friends if you can. And as always, please stay safe out there, especially on the roadways. And we will see you all next week.